out these statements here is by grabbing one of these cute little post-it guys and dragging it onto those lines. Now, just make sure if you've not used Miro before, there is a navigation panel on the left-hand side here. If you make sure this little cursor is selected in blue or press V on your keyboard, that will allow you to left-click and drag these little post-it guys so you can share your personal view as to what retrospectives are for you. And once you've done that, just further below, okay, just further below, there is also a bunch of post-it notes. You can double-click inside those and just share a few words about what retrospectives are for you. So that's just a way to get us talking about the subjects. As you're doing that, I will introduce myself for anyone who isn't familiar with me or my work. So my name is Chris Stone, the Virtual Agile coach. This is because I realized a couple of years ago that everyone had been talking about this golden situation of co-located teams and that everyone should aspire towards those. And I realized in my 10 years of working in Agile teams, I seldom ever had a perfectly co-located team. I always had an element of people working remotely. So I realized I had all these lessons to learn, I had all these tips and tricks I could share with others, and hence the Virtual Agile coach was born. And retrospectives and continuous improvement is very much my thing. It's what I love doing. It's that perfect opportunity for a team to just reflect on how things have gone, how they could be better, what they could try differently, what experiments they have available to them. But I'm also a big fan of livening them up a bit, making it a bit more fun, creating energizing ways of doing it. Now, if you prefer to do so today, you can speak aloud in the Zoom chat. You can type inside, you can type in the Zoom chat, you can speak aloud, you can chat with me. But it seems so far, the majority of people are feeling that retrospectives are more on the magical side. They are more light bulb moments. They are more powerful than they are frustrating, which is good to see. Hopefully that's the case for many others. I'm just going to allow a few more people into the room who are waiting. What have we got in terms of the comments? The team has a voice. Absolutely. Healthy tension. I love that, because I don't want people just to agree with me all the time. We want this healthy conflict. That's a positive. That's how we get innovative ideas. That's how we challenge one another. Retros can help you improve create an improvement backlog for the team. Absolutely. You can use gameplay to create collaboration. Some teams neglect retros. Absolutely. And we'll probably reflect on some of those today. Some teams definitely don't follow up on retros. That can be a situation where the team just vents and complains, but actually doesn't do anything tangibly different. And I'm sure many of us have seen that. There can be a law of diminishing returns, but it can be also a team building opportunity. And it can be about discovery and validation, an opportunity to reflect, learn, improve, to create an environment, to have a safe space to talk. These are all great things. Now, again, anyone who's been to any of my talks, I tend to avoid just talking at people. So, and what my preference is to allow you, the audience, to choose the destiny of this talk. As I said, there's lots of different tips and tricks here, and we might not cover all of them today. We're going to cover as many as we can. But importantly, I'd like you to choose the direction of play. Imagine when you were younger and you had those books and it'd be like, you're on an adventure and you get to the end of the page and it says, if you want to choose this direction, if you want to go into this house, choose page 294, and you go there and you realize your character had died. It's a bit like that. You're going to get to choose the direction, hopefully without the death. So what I'd like you to do, and someone's already started doing it, bringing your attention to this part on the board, you have 4 options available to you: the foundations for continuous improvement, facilitation styles, formats, and finishing up. So finishing up is all about how we turn those discussions into actionable things the team can do differently. Again, we'll be voting with these little post-it note guys. The section with the most votes is where we will start, and then we will go from there. So it really is over to you folks. Where would you most like to start? So far, facilitation styles currently taking the lead. You do get 1 vote each, folks. There should be plenty of these little post-it guys. And again, for anyone who's joined a little bit later, there is a Miro link in the Zoom chats. Jamie, if you wouldn't mind sharing that again. I can see there's about 35, 36 people on this board. So hopefully people can get on that link and share their thoughts. I think currently facilitation is taking the lead, or remaining in the lead, shall we say. And then it might be followed by formats in seconds. So we're going to give it another 10 to 15 seconds. Get your votes in.
I have to admit, I forgot Edward. So at the end, if we can just save a little bit of time, Chris, for Edward to talk to us about a really cool initiative.
All right, well, we'll make sure there's time kept aside at the end.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
Be great.
Sorry, Edward.
By the way, another thing about my personal style when I'm giving talks, I'd rather you just interact me throughout. Don't wait for a time at the end. If you have a question, just don't hesitate to ask. All right.
Just like I did.
Just like you did. Right. So facilitation is in the lead. So we are going to go there first. We're going to talk about facilitating retrospectives. So a few things you could try. Now, really important to note, of these things that I share with you today, they may not work for your team. They should all be applied to your context, your situation, your culture, the scenario you're facing. They are options at your disposal. Just like I say, Agile is a tool belt to an extent. On my left hip, I might have Scrum, and that's a sword. On my right hip, I might have Kanban, and that's a hammer. Apply these tips and tricks at your own discretion. So first of all, question for you, and someone's already started doing it, embracing silence. Question for you before we do this. How does silence feel during a retrospective? Or indeed, if you're facilitating any ceremony, you ask a question and it just goes silence. How does it make you feel? Again, on this line, does it make you feel really uncomfortable? Or have you got this? Do you feel confident in that situation? You should be here on the boards. Share your thoughts. All right, so we've got a bit of a mixture. A lot of people on the left-hand side saying it makes you feel really uncomfortable. A couple of people in the middle feeling, okay, it's all right. Some people have got this. I'm going to be honest with you, folks. I used to believe firmly that if I was facilitating a retrospective, if I was facilitating anything, and if I asked a question and it just went silent, I thought, oh God, I've asked the wrong question, or I'm doing something wrong, or I haven't done this correctly. And those questions started spinning around in my head. But what I've since learned is actually people process things in different ways. Some people like to think before responding. Some people are like me who just talk to think, you just chatter away, and that's perfectly okay. So one of the things I encourage you to try, if you are facing a situation like this, where perhaps people aren't speaking up at retrospectives, or you want to try and practice becoming more comfortable with silence, first of all, if you're faced with it, just pause before you respond. Don't jump in with the next question or follow up, because you could steer the direction of that retro or otherwise based on your perspectives. Just pause, give it 5 to 10 seconds, allow time for people to respond, first and foremost. Secondly, is anyone familiar with the concept of a silent retrospective? Feel free to share out loud, type in the Zoom chat if you have come across this before. No? I see a no.
Chris, is this a matter of everyone writing into a doc and then reading aloud afterwards?
One way of doing it, yeah. You can definitely, I'd consider that more on the asynchronous retrospective side of things. You create an environment where people can contribute their thoughts, and then you can all collectively together review them. That's one way of doing it, and that's one of the separate tips. This one, however, this silent retrospective, is essentially you get everyone together collectively on a group, and you have a virtual whiteboard or something like this, and the only rule is you cannot speak aloud, right? Now, why I found this quite powerful is it forces you to focus, right? If you can't challenge and talk to one another, you have to pay attention to what they're typing on sides, these little post-it notes and otherwise, and the only way you can clarify is by adding your own ones, and it can just force you to focus and be present with everyone, rather than allowing a situation where perhaps you get distracted by a Zoom message or a Slack message or an email or otherwise. You are in the present, in that moment with your audience, and equally, it can just allow people to speak up with safety, especially if there's an environment where you don't have a deeply entrenched psychological safety and nobody wants to speak aloud. Just creating a space where people can contribute anonymously, get their questions clarified via post-it notes, and have everyone focused can result in great outcomes. There's a gent called Dov Tsal who shared this technique with me. And for anyone who is interested in learning a little bit more about it further, if you click this little YouTube icon, you will be taken to a video which takes you and will explain in more detail how it works logistically. So I encourage you to do that later. But I'm just saying, here is an option at your disposal. If silence is uncomfortable, give this a go. Okay. Any questions on silent retrospectives before we move on to the next tip?
Just a quick question.
Yes.
So what if it is, even the basic foundation of where the teams are not quite familiar with what retrospective is, what value that we could extract out of it, and still, in spite of various formats that you still try to trigger or try to motivate your team members, but still the retrospectives are remaining non-participative in nature rather than being silent, right? I know silence can be interpreted in a different ways, but then what if the teams are not showing much of the interest in the retrospective itself?
Yeah, so I'd say again, all of these tips they are to be applied for your given context and scenario. And if you're working with a team that perhaps hasn't gotten to the point where they are regularly doing retrospectives yet, or they're not bought into the idea, or they're not accustomed to doing it, you might want to start with something a bit more basic. A lot of these tips you may see, I've kind of put like a difficulty level and a psychological safety requirement level. So I would say this one's on the medium side, probably for a more established team. Once they've got the basis of continuous improvement, they know that you're doing retro and why you're doing it. That's when you might try using a silent retrospective. And there are other tips I have that try to bring quieter voices out. And there are obviously lots of other formats out there that are great for the newer teams who are just getting started.
Would you recommend also at that point, after you've tried something, doing something similar to an MPS or other kind of poll of just like, how did that work for people? What was your general enjoyment of it? Is this something that we want to continue?
It's a good question. And let me draw your attention to another part of one of the tips. So this is more on the finishing up side of things. So I firmly believe in what I call retroception. So we inspect and adapt. This is like Inception, like it's like a retro within a retro. So what I try to do whenever I run a retro, I always build in some sort of feedback loop, some sort of mechanism to inspect and adapt how that retro was itself. So with that in mind, there are lots of people who do this as well. My personal stance, here's an example of my matrix retrospective. And at the end, you get the team to rate, right, from a 1 to 5, what's this? A 1, the retro took place and maybe some team members were missing and there were some potential improvement items, but the time box wasn't respected, all the way to everyone contributed without fear of judgment. The time box was respected. You've identified actions with owners and you've celebrated both successes and some of the challenges you face. So you've got a mechanism to inspect and adapt how that retro was itself. And if you're scoring a 3 or a 2, then you can try and think about what could we do differently to improve that retrospective. Mm-hmm. You could equally use things like a fist of 5, or just people simply ask the question, how was that retro for you folks? What could we do better? I firmly believe that we need to do more of this, not just inside retrospectives, but every meeting you have. If I draw your attention to another part we have here, and this is all about, I think I've lost it now. It's basically the concept that we get into the habit, meetings become part of your team's furniture almost, that they end up in the diary, they never leave. And sometimes you're in them, but you're not talking in them. You're just there. You're there for information or otherwise. And I firmly believe we need to change that. Each meeting has a group of people together investing time in that session. And if we know we're in a busy distributed working world these days, where sometimes you're back to back to back to back, and you don't have much time to work on things in between meetings. I firmly believe we need to inspect and adapt those meetings themselves. So I always aim to build a ROTI loop, a return on time invested loop, into every meeting I run. Even if that's a daily stand-up, you can quite simply say 1 to 5, what was that like today? How could it be better? Does that make sense?
So Chris, one of the things that I do is instead of doing it in the retro, I'll do an anonymous poll in their Slack channel. That way they don't feel like they're sitting in the meeting having to be forced to answer another question. They can just do it whenever and it's anonymous.
Perfect. And if that works, that is wonderful. But the fact is you're trying to improve how that team works on a more iterative basis. It's almost like a micro retrospective. It's like creating the environment for continuous improvement by building into the DNA of how that team works.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Chris, will this board remain accessible after the session? I have someone asking.
Yeah, this board persists forever. So if you ever want to refer back to it, as long as you have the link, you can review it.
Okay, thanks.
All right, next tip then. We're still on the topic of facilitation. Now, many of you may have seen that I'm a big fan of changing the format for retrospectives. Often I won't run the same retrospective twice. Now, this might be controversial, but sometimes fix the format, right? If you've got a team that is continuously improving how they work by using a more basic method like start, stop, continue, and if that works for them and it's resulting in actionable improvements, the format doesn't matter. Fundamentally, what works for the team is the best approach. So you don't need to gild it. You don't need to make it perfect. You don't need to make it flashy and exciting like I often try. You don't need to do that if it works for the team. So a regular start, stop, continue, sad, mad, glad, liked, learned, loved, 4 Ls, all those basic retrospectives that have been around forever. If they work for the team, there's nothing else you need to worry about. But if you observe that perhaps the responses are getting stale or the actions that you're identifying aren't resulting in improvements, you might want to try switching things up. So one tip there, fix the format, really easy to do. The alternative and the inverse of that is what I've just described, flexing the format. Very easy to do, especially given there are so many resources out there in the world. My own website, for example, has over 50 retrospective templates freely accessible. There are folks like Dave Westgarth and Steve Sampson-Jones and Stuart Tonkin and many others who have created free retrospectives on lots of different themes. And I'm just going to share a few examples of my own. So we've got the Diwali theme retrospective here, a retro for good over evil. Very well received by those from the, a non-Western culture in my experience, has resulted in quieter voices. I can see someone accidentally moving that. Let me just fix it. Has resulted in quieter voices coming out of their shell. So has been very well appreciated, particularly because a lot of the retro templates out there often end up being Westernized. So give that one a go if you haven't used it before. The dog meme retrospective, everyone loves dogs and everyone loves memes. So why not communicate through the medium of memes? Very easy to run. You've got Journey the rock band. People love music. People love television and movies and all sorts. There is a reason why television, movies, books, video games are billion-dollar industries. It's because humans love escapism. So why not build in that escapism, that enjoyment of things into how the team works by using a themed retrospective? So rather than just fixing the format, if the team are finding retrospectives a little bit boring, sad, mad, glad isn't resonating, then try flexing the format. And the great thing is nowadays, compared to when I was running retrospectives in the past as a Scrum Master, when I was doing that, I'd have to go to a room, probably a half hour full time, just to prepare the room, get all my materials, draw something pretty on a board, and then facilitate it. Nowadays, if you're working in a remote environment, you can access a new template, a few clicks of a button, and run it with your team just like that. And thank you, Charlene, for sharing Dave's link there.
Chris,
any of those.
If you're looking to add innovation, or if you're seeing a need to add innovation to the larger theme, what does that say about the basics that you're working from? If you need to add a little bit of color to keep people involved, what does it say about how the actual retro is being run?
I wouldn't use that as a critique of how the retro is being run or the environment. I'm just a firm believer that the workplace can be fun with a bit of creativity. Now, yes, you may have a situation where perhaps the facilitator is maybe running the retros a bit flat, or maybe the team doesn't understand the fundamentals of retrospectives and those aren't quite working quite right. Again, these are options at your disposal to jazz things up if needed, to result in slightly different thinking. And I'll give you an example. I'm going to have a quick change of pace over to here. Stale questions beget stale answers. All right. Now, I'm sure many of you have faced this. Has anyone been any a daily stand-up, and you can share again on this duality line, where someone says, right, what blockers or impediments do we have? And you either get no blockers or just silence, or you get a blocker share. Share your most common response when that question comes up in a daily stand-up. And again, we should be here on the board now for anyone who's not aware. There we go. Now, I love asking this question because the very vast majority of the time in my experience, it's either no blockers or silence, okay? Now, I believe there's a reason for this. One, humans don't like to admit that they're stuck with something, right? It suggests and questions your integrity a little bit. We like to be able to be seen as competent and to deal with things on our own, okay? So often when I've asked this, or when I used to ask this question, because I don't ask it anymore, when this question has come up in a daily stand-up, or I'm observing a team and they use this question, most commonly the response is, oh, nothing, or silence entirely. More rare is it that they actually share a blocker. Now, an alternative you could ask instead of that, if we flex the question very slowly, we remove that stale question, we say, how could I be helped to progress today? Or what would help me move the team forward today? Or what would help me achieve the team's collective goal today? You ask that question, essentially it's the same outcome. You're still trying to work out what is stopping us moving forwards, what is stopping us making progress. But all you've done is flip the direction of that question very slightly, and it can result in a lot more response. The same goes for retrospectives. Rather than, you know, what made me glad in the last sprint, you could be saying, you can be using Queen the Rock Band and having the song Don't Stop Me Now playing in the background. It's Don't Stop Me Now, what should the team keep doing because we're doing really well? What are we doing great at? So again, a slight change in language can result in a very different response. And most importantly, I have found by doing these themes, engaging retrospectives, people are connected to the subject matter, they're engaged in the session, they're less likely to have their attention pulled away elsewhere, and they end up looking forward to retrospectives rather than it being this chore, this frustrating experience. So,
hey, Chris, quick question, if you don't mind.
Please do, go for it.
Yep. So you did mention a while ago that the format doesn't matter as long as the teams understand or how to extract the value out of the retrospective. However, there's one thought or a scenario where based on the format that you use for retrospective, you may also end up having status updates from the team saying, for example, what went well, hey, I have completed this development, I have completed that testing, right? So would you want to put additional thought process and walk us through some of those aspects where selecting a format of a retrospective will help us get the responses that we expect that aligns and to the purpose of the retrospective, Chris? Well,
for me, the purpose of the retrospective is continuous improvement. Okay, now whatever methods that comes in, usually comes in the form of action. The team's actions or experiments that the team's going to try differently to enable them to become better than they were in the previous few weeks, iteration, duration that we're working to. So the templates that I most commonly create, they are anything between 4 to 6 prompts, usually on a theme like Queen the Rock Band as an example, and they are designed to try and get the team talking. It's about generating insights that they then can collectively prioritize and pull actions from. And when we get to that section in a moment, I'll walk you through how my template works and some examples of the questions that may arise as a consequence.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Yeah, somebody asking on average, how often do you switch up the format? My answer is anytime, every retro.
Yeah, anytime you want, right? Personally, I will aim to run a different retro format every time I run a retro. And I will even build into the retro itself the ability for the team to select what retro they want to run next. So you're empowering the team to choose that. Now, here's some examples of some prompts you might have. So on the dog meme retro, you've got that famous pun dog. How could we enjoy my work more? So it's about being fun. You kind of got that dog that's on fire. Everything's on chaos. So what makes us nervous as a team? What are we not prioritizing? You've got insanity. What problems do we have as a team? What's frustrating that we need to address? Who's awesome? So this is about celebrating success. Who's doing some great work that we need to talk about? You've got things like in the Squid Games retrospective. I'm not going to go into that one too much in case anyone hasn't seen it, but it uses some of the games from the show to give prompts. And then in the Journey one, this is all about using the Journey discography to, again, generate insights. So any way you want it is a famous song. What one change would you have in the next iteration if you could have it any way you wanted it? What would you change? What would you like to see most changed? Or what do we need separate ways? What do we need to part ways with? This is essentially the same as saying what made us sad, what was negative for us, but it's just phrased in a slightly different way. Does that make sense? Sorry, I didn't catch you ask that question.
I just want to say how much I love the Journey theme. Don't stop believing.
Don't stop believing. Yeah, what shouldn't we stop believing in as a team? Where should we persevere? This might be something that the team's tried and isn't quite working perfectly, but you fundamentally believe it will work if you invest some more effort in it. You can get that out of the team. I can see, Heather, you've got your hand up. Over to you.
Yeah, I just had a quick question. I'm not as familiar with Miro. I do try to change up my retros every single time. They seem to get stale. I have a pretty quiet team, so I feel like I'm kind of entertaining them. So this is a great tool for me to make them much more interactive. My question is, I have 2 questions actually. I do have 2 separate teams, but my leadership likes to have the retros really big. So I have a really big group that I'm trying to do a retro with. I try to break them out into rooms to collect the info and then bring them back as a larger group to discuss it. That's typically the format after we start with an icebreaker. My question here is, I love a lot of these formats that you have for Miro. I'm not that familiar with it. How can I take these templates that you have? Do I need to create them myself? Is there some templates that I can like draw from? And then what do you do with the content that you get from here? Do you just leave them on this board? And then, or do you repurpose them like on an off sheet somewhere where you can track everything?
All
Sorry,
right.
there's a lot of questions there.
Good questions. So first question, templates. All of my templates they begin their life, they form, and their origin is inside Miro. Now, what you can do from there is, if you have a Miro license, doesn't sound like you do, but if you have a Miro license, you have the ability to upload any of my templates into your own instance with a few clicks of a button. If you don't, I have the ability, or I've made the ability for you to access an image, right? So an image of this template, which is blank, has no post-its upon it. And all you do is you upload that image into your own virtual whiteboard of choice, whether that's Mural, whether that's Google Jamboards, whether that's Lucid, Spark, or otherwise. And once that image is inside it, you can then overlay on top of it with your own post-it notes inside that tool. So it's a quick hack, a quick workaround that enables you to access these templates and use them for your own in whichever tool you have access to. On to your second question, which I think I've forgotten now. What was it?
I'm not sure I had another question. I think you answered it. I think my only statement was about my management team likes to have the two teams come in as a whole group. So I have 2 Scrum teams, all the product managers and the leadership, admins and testing all together. So I do split them out after we do the icebreaker. But I'm just struggling with all the like trying to actually get action items out of it because it's so much content.
So the question, your second question was what you do with these items afterwards, right? So from this, what my aspiration is I run a retro, I'm facilitating. I'm aiming for it to be a maximum of 45 minutes. The reason for this is I want people to be engaged throughout and not be thinking about the next meeting, not have their attention slip, because humans' attention spans are slipping, and there's a point about that a bit later. So I aim for 45 minutes, and in that time frame, I'm doing a bit of an icebreaker because I firmly believe in human connection. And then these prompts, there's usually 4 to 6. They are options at the team's disposal that they can use in a time frame. There isn't the expectation to complete all of them. And what I do is I introduce one at a time. Let's say we were doing the journey retrospective with this audience today. I would say, hey, what don't we need to stop believing in? And I would allow people a few minutes to share their thoughts in silence on the post-it notes. What that does is that avoids the dominance hierarchies, that avoids louder voices taking over the conversation. You could be doing this in your smaller groups using liberating structures, 1, 2, 4, and otherwise. But once you've got something that the team agrees is the most important thing, you get them to create an action from that they can commit to. Ideally, that someone is owning. And then from that needs to be present. It needs to be visible. You can't just leave it on a board somewhere and forget about it. If it's not visible, it will be forgotten about. And odds are the team or teams will be complaining about it in a few weeks' time again. So once you've done this retro, I always encourage the team to pull this into whatever workflow management tool they're using, whether that's a Jira, Azure DevOps, or otherwise. It needs to go on their backlog alongside all their other work and be prioritized accordingly. And again, this is why I encourage a maximum of 3 to 5 actions or experiments per retro, because there's all well and good discussing 20 things in parallel, but you won't have time to address all of them. And you really need to just focus on the most important things to address. So the thing you do is you identify those actions, ideally at least 1 per prompt, and then get it on your Jira, your Azure DevOps or otherwise, so that it's very visible and discussed. And if it's being forgotten about, you could even ask and add a prompt in your daily stand-ups. How are our retrospective actions progressing, just to get people continuously thinking about them. Hopefully that answers your question. Right, I'm just going to
awesome, thank you.
Good. Just going to whiz through a couple more on the facilitation side of things, and then we're going to try and do a few on the other one. Right. So we've heard about fixing the format. We've heard about flexing the format. Excuse my language, but sometimes fuck the format. It's irrelevant, right? All you might need is an open and honest conversation with the group and the audience. Sometimes it might be that you had a long, hard sprint and everyone's exhausted. Sometimes playing around with a fancy format or otherwise isn't quite right and just can be distracting. I've got an anecdote here. This is from another team that shared a story. They used my Home Alone retro. It was around about Christmas. And one of the prompts from the Home Alone retrospective was that famous line, "Keep the change, you filthy animal." And this was all about what do we want to stop doing as a team. Now, someone, when they were part of that retro, they said the retro board itself, right? And it took that Scrum Master off guard. They weren't expecting it. Everyone else was engaged and enjoying it. Sometimes it's just not working, and it may happen. You might try a format, it's not landing, the energy level's low. Sometimes, honestly, I encourage you just to acknowledge the elephant in the room, say, is this working for you guys? If not, let's just have an honest conversation. And it could just be in the form of, what's the one thing we need to address, right? And just get people talking about it. That's all. You don't necessarily always need a fancy format. So give that one a go. If you notice the elephant in the room, it's not working, just acknowledge it, move on. Don't keep trying to push it down people's throats. Okay. And then on facilitation still, you can also try Fluxing the Facilitator. I'm sure many of you have tried this. You've got this great image of round, round around the chairs. Each facilitator brings their own stance. So what you might do, and this will help build the capability for continuous improvement into the team, rather than it being reliant upon a Scrum Master or coach to do so, you could just have a nomination process or a rotation process where maybe this person facilitates the retro one sprint and then another person does it another time. And what this does, as I said, it brings in a bit of a different, everyone has their own element, their own style for doing it. And fundamentally, it can remove that situation where they're very reliant upon one person to ensure that a good retrospective happens. So I encourage you to give that a go. Try Fluxing the Facilitator. Another one, and this is linked back to what Heather was saying about, or what I mentioned about Heather. I aim to enable the team to diverge and then converge back together. So you can use liberating structures to do this. People will be familiar with techniques like 1, 2, 4 all, where you have a group and you just say, right, I want you to work on your own and identify your most important things, and then come together in pairs, so twos, and then trim some things out, trim out some duplicates, and just suggest 2 things or whatever, and then go into group of 4s, and you keep narrowing things down until you get to the most important thing to that group. Now that could come in the form of, you've got 10 teams, 10 agile teams, all identifying their things and then coming into 2 teams, and so 1 team, 2 team, 4 team, all teams. And what this might help you do is identify a systemic impediment that affects the whole collective development stream. So rather than having an impediment or a blocker or a challenge or an experiment that is locally affecting just one team, you can use these techniques to identify things that affect many teams in parallel. Okay. The other one is, I think we've lost the image for it here. I think someone's dragged it somewhere by mistake, or I've maybe deleted it, but this one is all about breaking the ice. Now, I know, Heather, I think you mentioned using icebreakers. I am a firm believer in using icebreakers too. We are humans. We're not just avatars behind a screen or names on a screen. So I like to learn about the teams I'm working with, and there's lots of ways of doing this. So here's a few of my examples, and I encourage you to try these. So you've got, this was rated into the Taco Tuesday retro, which was a challenge from Mike Cohen when he appears on my podcast. You get the team building their perfect taco. You've got a Shaun of the Dead retro. What's your zombie apocalypse plan? And that's a little Lego version of the Winchester for anyone familiar with that film. We've got the Journey retro. You've got a bit of a Mad Lib. So you could say just a small town agile team living in a development department, etc. They took that, and you could just talk about their sprint. So you can get them to Mad Lib their sprint. You've got things like share a dog meme that describes the last iteration. You've got what's your favorite thing about Halloween if you're doing a retro around Halloween. It's really easy to build in these icebreakers into the way the team works. And there's also lots of free icebreaker templates on the Miroverse for anyone who isn't familiar with the Miroverse as well. Okay.
We can do a five minute or so warning here, Chris, so we can save some time for Edward.
Yes, okay.
Perfect.
What I'm going to do is I'm just going to do a couple more on the formats. So we're going to jump to there, and I'll bring your attention to here. So Retrospection. Is anyone familiar with the concept of Retrospection? Perhaps share aloud or give me a hands raised or something in Zoom.
What you want to happen in the sprint?
Well, it's a retrospective format that focuses on the future. So whereas a retrospective will say, how have things gone in the last iteration? With a future perspective, you say, right, imagine yourselves 2 weeks or a month or 3 months down the line. Where would we like to be and how are we going to get there? What changes are we going to make to ensure we are successful in reaching that? So again, something I encourage you to do is build in time for futurespection as well as just retrospecting. What you might do is do something like have one futurespective every four retrospectives, for example. Or equally, you could build in one futurespective quote or prompt inside every retro you do. So here's some example. Any way you want it, so if you could have it any way you want it in the next sprint, what would it be? One vision, what's our vision for the next iteration? What's our goal as a team? So again, we're imagining ourselves in the future. You've got things like, what might a newspaper headline say about us in 2 weeks' time if we were successful? What successes will we have achieved if we have achieved our goals? What risks or impediments are we going to face and how have we navigated them? How have we surpassed these? And you can see here, I've made a back to the futurespective template that does exactly this. So the way it works is you've got your DeLorean clock and you're setting your time in the future, usually 2 weeks or a month in time, and you're asking some of these questions. What does success look like for us in our destination time? What investments have we made to try and get there? What pitfalls are we going to face? Vishal, you have a question.
Hi, Chris. Great seminar on the retros. Not a question as such, however, are you referring the futurespection to PI retro or release retro?
It can be applied to any time frame you choose. So if you're doing it on a team retrospective basis and you're saying, right, how are things going to look for us in 2 weeks' time, which is a common sprint length, that's how you do it. If you're doing it with a program increment in a safe world, and you're saying, like, how are things going to look at the end of the next PI, and what investments have we made to get there? So you can apply the same thinking to a different or a variable time frame depending on your situation.
Yeah. So my 2 cents on that. So for our release retros, it works. It really have given us best results. So we collate the sprint retros feedback within a release, and then we format something called as a rainbow of improvement aspects that we want to carry from this particular release to the next.
Yeah.
Also,
so you got this rainbow things of what things we're going to do differently next time round. That's kind of a future concept. But in the same way, I've used a technique called the Pain Avalanche, right? And this is like you've got a mountain visual and lots of post-it notes flowing down the side of the mountain. And you're saying, right, what are the things that we're struggling with right now systemically? What are the things holding us back from making progress? And that's more of a backwards look because it's things that are already happening. So there's lots of techniques for enabling both retrospection and futurespection.
Yeah, thank you.
There you go. I think I'm back. I mentioned earlier the asynchronous retrospective. So someone talked about another form of retrospective, the silent retrospective, but there's also asynchronous retrospective. So someone mentioned creating a Word document and enabling people to contribute their thoughts during a time frame. This is where you have a retrospective that takes place in your time. And this can be particularly powerful when you've got teams working all over the world, and perhaps aligning them all around a perfect golden time can be difficult. So one way you can do an asynchronous retrospective, and again, it's something that I would encourage you do when you've got a good level of psychological safety. Ideally, the team is a bit more mature and is already doing retrospectives. But if you're struggling with finding time for it, asynchronous retrospection is something you could try. So you just get a tool of your choice, whether that's a Word document, whether that's a Miro or a virtual whiteboard like this. You communicate the expectations from everyone to be involved, i.e., it's going to be during this time frame, and this is where we need you to share your thoughts. And then from that, you agree a clear process for distributing the actions that come out of it. Now, what this enables people to do is add their thoughts whenever they think of them, rather than it being, oh, I'm going to only talk about retrospective items 2 weeks later, and I thought about this on day 1 of the sprint, and I'm waiting for that time to happen. So you could easily create these. You could do a sprint planning. You could create one of these locations for people to add retrospective items as they go along. and then you could build in a time to check in against them at the end of the sprint. So you can definitely do asynchronous retrospections. Right, Jamie, I'm conscious of time. Do we need to give it over?
Yeah, just if everybody will hang on, there may be some time we can stick around if Chris has a chance to stick around for questions afterwards. But if we could give Edward just a few, he said just a few minutes here. And then if you have just a few minutes, Chris, we could stick around for some Q&A.
So whilst Edward's just sharing his thoughts, I will stick around a little bit. What I've done as well, I brought your attention to a space on the mirror board where you can share your personal thoughts as to how this talk has been. There is a scale here from 1, the worst ever, 3, it was okay, and 5 was the best ever. And you can drag these little post-it notes onto this little scale so you can share your personal thoughts as to how this has been. Now, again, in the interest of continuous improvements, I always aim for my own talks to be continuous improved themselves. Any feedback is welcome. It's all, whether it's positive or negative, it does help me with improving. And this helps me live and breathe the principles I'm professing. So whilst those additional thoughts are being shared, do take a moment to share your personal perspectives as to how this talk has been. Conscious it's been a bit of a rush. Obviously, there's lots to get through. I could deliver this same talk 50 times and it'd be done in 50 different ways due to the direction the audience takes me and the level of engagement we have. And
thanks,
remember,
Chris. I so appreciate it. And I do apologize for not doing this at the beginning, kind of messing up the flow here. But if you guys want to hang on for a moment, please don't leave now. We'd like you to hear what Edward has to say. So I'm going to turn it over to him. And then afterwards, we'll have time for some Q&A for Chris for a few minutes.
Thanks, Jamie. And I was a little quick on doing the screen swap, so I really do apologize for that. Chris, first off, thank you so much. We're a big believer with job hackers at giving back and being able to do that progressive growth and continuous growth. What we do is we offer free 6-week classes that teach people enough not only to pass the Professional Scrum Master 1 certification, but also introduce them to a lot of things that if you were taught in an MBA class, currently the MBAs are more focused on teaching about running an 18th century railroad. So instead, this is a lot more about bringing in what is agility, what are the principles, what is queuing theory, what is test-driven development, behavior-driven development, all sorts of things. And all this is a free 6-week class that we offer to people that goes for 12 different classes in the mornings. What we found, though, is all of this is a theoretical understanding about Scrum and Agile and the practices, and we wanted to add an additional practical extension course to this. So what we've been able to do over the last 2 years is we've built a 6-week program that takes alumni from the Job Hackers class and lets them submit themselves to be put into Scrum teams where they serve not only as the developers, but they serve as the stakeholders, because the product that they're working on as a Scrum team is their collective job search. So it becomes not only a combination of a working group, but it also is a matter of people are daily practicing Scrum and going through the practices of what it means to be able to be doing a daily Scrum. We're not looking at doing the full 8 hours every 2 weeks or anything else. These are 1-week sprints. This is what we're generally looking at for the kind of suggested time periods. But what we're looking for are facilitators who serve both as Scrum Masters and product owners. I write that out here, but just to be able to give a sense of that, because you have the developers that are also being the stakeholders. So there's no software development here, but everyone's actively practicing and working towards actions and artifacts that are advancing their job search individually, as well as advancing the team's collective job search. And the goal of the program is that they learn Scrum by practicing Scrum. So the time periods, I say it's an 8 to 9 hour week time commitment. When I show something like this as a Scrum event schedule, these aren't this is a 3-hour planning, this is an 1.5 hour stand up. This is an example of what it looked like this was a time window that facilitators in the past made a commitment to, that they made available for a 90-minute planning or a 15-minute stand-up or something else that's along those lines. With all of that said, we are looking for facilitators that are able to, 1, attend 3 90-minute trainings from July 30th to August 12th. This is a great way because then being those facilitators, you're the Scrum Master and wearing the hat of a product owner as well, of these Scrum teams. That is a low-cost way. You don't have someone that's above you. We have an Agile coach that'll be working with you, but otherwise it's pretty much your own team to be able to run and be able to do what experiments you want with helping people advance in a really, really positive cause. So I would love to take any 1 or 2 questions. I want to get right back to Chris, but if anyone has any questions about this, otherwise I'm going to put my email in the chat for right now. We're going to later have a form that can be signed out, but for right now, I'm putting my email, egordon.project@gmail.com into the chat here. I'd love to hear from anyone that is interested. I know we have a number of people on that might be able to contribute that time, and I would love to be able to speak with you more about paying it forward.
Question.
Great cause, really great cause.
Can I ask a quick question? Is there any way you can reduce it to an hour? Because it's really hard with people working full time to have an hour-and-a-half meeting.
So that.
Because I mean, you lost me for being a volunteer. If it's a minimum of an hour-and-a-half, I can't do it.
If you're able to run a planning in 60 minutes, then I would encourage you to find a way to be able to do so. But otherwise, this might not be the program for you.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have the time, but I would love to help if I could.
We love hearing that people are encouraged by our cause. We'd love for you to be able to spread this to any others. You'll be hearing from us again at other Scrum Masters of the Universe meetups. So we want to be able to put this out there. No, we understand that this is a larger time commitment. This might even be for those that are currently taking a break from actively working as well, or those that are semi-retired, or those that are have a more free form, but they're looking to give back. But it's really about what time can you give to a Scrum team to be able to advance and be sure that they're able to do what they want to do when these individuals are just forming as developers. So you can ask if you can give them 60 minutes. I don't know if you can get everything you want to get done in 60 minutes would be the challenge that I would present, Charlene. I'm not seeing any other questions, but I'm going to give room for silence for just 5-10 seconds.
Hey, Edward, maybe I misunderstood. I actually posted a question directly to you, but
thank you so much. I apologize.
Do you want me to ask the question or you?
Yeah, all right. So you had asked if this is for job seekers or people that have jobs want to give back via their experiences in Agile. What our call out here today is for the facilitators, is for those that are being the Scrum Masters and the Scrum Masters and product owners. We are fully happy to be able to accept people that want to be on that developer side of things, as opposed to the Scrum Master and product owner, where you're one Scrum Master for a 9-person team. You would be part of the 9-person developers part of the team. But we also would advise, or we're extending that out to those that have completed the Agile MBA course that we offer the job hackers. I'll put a link out to that as well, because that's starting July 5th, if that is of interest to anyone. But that would be how you would be able to have the eligibility to be able to apply to this other program if you're interested in being a job seeker as opposed to a facilitator.
Okay, so if you want to be I'm still a little confused. So if you want to be a facilitator, do you need to do the jobhackers.org MBA?
No, not at all. We're just looking for experienced Scrum Masters and experienced product owners that are giving back.
Okay, great. Thank you. That clarifies it.
Yep, and I put his email in chat again. If you're interested for more information, just shoot Edward an email. And thanks, Edward. Appreciate it. Chris, thank you for your grace and cutting you short there for a little bit. But anybody have any questions for Chris? Let's hand it back over to him. Go ahead and just shout it out if you have something.
Okay, I'm going to shout out a serious 5, very serious 5 for how I rate it. And your creativity is just beautiful to see. Can you save the whole thing? Or do you just have to save the link?
So I can basically save all of this as a PDF, and that can be sent around. If you save the link, you can navigate back to this and review it at your leisure. Those are the options there.
Okay, and then for the templates, do you need to subscribe for those, or it just accesses?
If you go to my website, there's no need to subscribe to anything. It's all entirely free. You can just navigate as you please, find one that resonates with you and download and use it.
Yep, I put a link to that in chat to his retros.
Okay, great. I'll change it to a 10 from a 5. And we're not even.
Glad to hear it.
All right, thanks so much.
No problem. Any more questions from anyone else? I am at your disposal.
I've got kind of a tough one.
Go for it. Love
I have a team that has an end date.
Okay.
So and it's not soon, it's like 2 years in the future.
Okay.
But I'm seeing participation in retros decrease precipitously after the announcement that this team is not going to be active at this end date. If you have any initial recommendations, I would love to hear them. I'm in the start of asking for assistance, but if you have any initial thoughts, I'd love it.
Yeah, so I think sometimes things like this, it's just to acknowledge the elephant in the room situation, right? You can just mention, is it just me, or have I noticed participation has started to wane a little bit following that announcement? And then just try and pry and understand what it is that's causing people to be less active or participate less as a consequence of that decision. Is there anything that worries them about that? Sometimes just acknowledging that and getting that out there and providing people the space and the environment to share can be very powerful.
Call the question and talk to the elephant in the room. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
But it could be like you're misinterpreting it, and that it might have just been coincidence that a few people weren't available. I don't know what the duration you're talking about here and how many people have stopped turning up. Right, I feel like that may be the end of the question then, unless there's some more coming in the chat. Thank you everyone for participating and engaging and sharing your own thoughts and asking your questions. Is always welcome. I look forward to coming back to the community again one day.
Thanks so much, Chris.
Thank you so much, Chris, for your time and reflecting your thought. I think totally appreciate the super creative way of doing things. So thank you so much for taking out your time.
Happy to.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I really appreciate it. And I'll share in my own experience with using these themed retros. It's been quite some time ago. I think I first used one of Chris's themed retros, maybe at the very beginning of Chris's voyage into this land. But I will tell you that when a team is just doing, like I joined an organization where all Scrum teams are using 4Ls, right? An ADO, right? It's an Azure DevOps are using for their product backlog, and it's a format within Azure DevOps. And every retrospective, they're doing the 4Ls. And what I found is that they just really had this kind of narrow view of their sprint. But by using these themes, it opens it up, and it lets them look back on the retrospective through different lenses. And that's where the power of this is, right? Because you get them thinking in different ways about the retrospective that they just had. And that's where it's just valuable, right? And you're uncovering things that you could never uncover just using 4Ls all the time, for example. That's just an example. I'm not trying to pick on 4Ls, but you get the point. So, and then it gets exciting because they're like, "Whoa, what's next? Can we do this theme? Can we do that theme?" And then they get kind of excited about retro, right?
Yeah, I had a team once that they rotated who would facilitate, and they would come up with a new retro theme every time. And they had a tech lead called Christopher Murray, and someone created a retro centered around Christopher Murray and some of his popular quotes and things like that. And it was all centered around him as a person. It was brilliant, and it was just this engaging, fun experience for them.
Yeah.
Right. Pleasure once
right.
more. I'll see you all again at a future opportunity.
Yep. Chris, thank you for coming. I appreciate it so much. We always love having you here at Scrum Masters of the Universe, and we look forward to having you again in the future. Thanks so much.
Bye now.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.